Motorcycle-powered cars, they're the best, with no drawbacks at all, except when the engine explodes from a lack of adequate oil pressure. Such was the fate for the CBR engine in my Honda S600, but I got a new engine, and I don't want to get a third engine for a little while at least. So I must design a system to ensure proper oil pressure. You can solve this problem for a couple $1,000s, but I might be able to do it for a couple $100. Or maybe I can't. I don't know. Let's find out. There are two common ways to solve the oil starvation problem. The easy and cheap way is to use an oil accumulator like an Sump or this one from Moroso. This works by sort of storing oil pressure. When the oil pump pressurizes the system, it also pressurizes the accumulator. So when you lose oil pressure because of oil slosh or whatever, the accumulator bleeds oil back into the engine, keeping everything lubricated. I chose not to go this route for a couple of reasons. First of all, Sump didn't see my video and immediately send me a free Sump, which is unfortunate, but not surprising. Also, while the system is easy to install, it doesn't protect the engine for very long. As soon as your pickup loses oil, the accumulator spits oil back into the engine, but it does so at a decreasing pressure and only for a few seconds. Then, no oil pressure. A dry sump has multiple pickups inside the engine, and if any of them has oil, the system works indefinitely. Even if none of the pickups have oil, you still have a reservoir of several quarts of oil to go through before your oil pressure drops even slightly. So it's pretty much a bulletproof system in terms of maintaining oil pressure. You can buy these systems for different engines. You can buy pumps, oil pans, reservoirs, and sometimes a whole kit. The kits start at around $1,500, so let's see how much less than that we can spend. In a typical engine oiling system, what is sometimes called a wet sump, you have a pool of oil at the bottom in the oil pan. The oil pump sucks up oil from this pool and distributes it throughout the engine, maintaining enough pressure to keep the bearings and pistons happy. Since we live in a world with gravity, this pool is almost always at the bottom, right at the oil pump inlet. But sometimes you do wheelies, and sometimes you do barrel rolls, and sometimes you have fat, sticky tires that give you mad grip. And also your engine is not designed for a car, so this pool of oil is not a pool at the bottom of the pan, but off to one side or the other or scattered around randomly. For this, we have dry sumps. A dry sump system picks up oil from multiple locations inside the engine, usually around the perimeter of the oil pan. These pickup locations each have their own oil pump called a scavenging pump, which takes the oil and puts it into a tall, skinny reservoir. Your high-pressure oil pump, the one that distributes the oil throughout the engine, gets its oil from the bottom of that reservoir. Since you have multiple scavenging pumps, this reservoir is always full, or mostly full. So when you go to do a wheelie, roll, or turn to your heart's content, your engine is none the wiser. The oil accumulator is maybe the cheapest off-the-shelf way to solve the oiling problem, but it's still not all that cheap. Another even less expensive idea is to just have the oil pickup swivel inside the engine. You could maybe have a banjo fitting with seals on the end and a weight that swings out to the outside of a turn. An even simpler way to do this would be to have a tube going to each side of the engine with a weight in the middle. When you turn to the left, the weight slides to the right side and blocks off the left side inlet. This I could probably do for less than $1,500, but I don't love this for long-term use. Like, what happens when the weight gets gummed up and stops sliding? Then you're worse off than before. No, we're going to do this the right way, by cobbling together a dry sump from random cheap parts. A lot of dry sump systems use 3, 4, or sometimes 5 scavenging pumps, but I'm going to use 2, one at the right side and one at the left, both kind of in the rear. There is a possibility that I will be under hard braking and all the oil will slosh to the front away from both of the scavenging pumps. This is not a problem because the car can only slow down for a few seconds before it can't go any slower, and in those few seconds there is plenty of oil in the reservoir to feed the high pressure pump, so 2 it is. This means I need 2 scavenging pumps in addition to the 1 high pressure pump. Inside the CBR engine there is that high pressure pump driven by a chain coming from, I don't know, the crankshaft maybe? It has an output shaft that goes to the water pump. Here's my idea. There's a lot of space between the oil pump and the water pump, so we can add 2 scavenging pumps in the middle here. The high-pressure oil pump works with this clever starfish design where one half of the starfish area is expanding and the other half is contracting. So, stuck to the side of the starfish, you have 2 passageways, one in and one out. These oil pumps are basically free. They never go out unless you do what I did and starve them of oil, so you can get them for super cheap on eBay. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to buy 2 of these, probably 3 actually, just in case, and I'm going to cut out the middle part. I'll put it on a mill and mill that side flat, so I have this middle section of the pump. Then I can laser cut a piece that goes on the side with an inlet and an outlet. I can drill the side of that and run a tube to a corner of the engine. Then I can do the same thing again with another pump and run that tube to a different corner. Maybe I can even fit 3 of these things in here. After thinking about this for a while and after buying a few parts, I realized this is not a great idea for 2 reasons. These pumps are designed to have a constant oil supply. There's no bearing or anything like that. They're just supposed to always be soaked in oil. The whole point of a dry sump system is to have multiple scavenging pumps so that one of them can pick up oil while the other ones are running dry. Now there's always a mist of oil in the engine case, but I don't know if that's good enough to keep these guys happy. What might happen is that I go into a long sweeping corner and the scavenging pump on the inside doesn't get oil for 10 or 15 seconds and it stops working. Then I go around another corner and that pump isn't pumping, or worse, it's locked up and now none of my oil pumps are pumping. This also is not a great idea because I need a reservoir of oil and I can't really do this inside an oil pan. A reservoir needs to be tall and skinny, not short and fat. It also needs to be able to separate the air from the oil away from the inlet to the high pressure pump. So I could have the pumps inside the pan, but they would need to have outlets through the pan to the reservoir. I should probably put the pumps on the outside of the engine, and I need the right kind of pump. On a typical car engine, you could drive the sump pumps with a belt, but this is a motorcycle engine and has no such belts. The common way to do this on a bike engine is to just replace the water pump with the scavenge pumps and then use an electric water pump. So I can find some scavenge pumps that are the right size. I can design an adapter to fit on the engine where the water pump used to be. That will need the correct bolt circle, the right sealing surface, the correct shaft length and shape. And you know what? I'm just going to buy this part. Daily Engineering has exactly what I need with my exact adapter and everything ready to go. So I called up Bill Daly and gave him some money and moved on with my project. Now the challenge is to get the oil from the engine to the scavenge pumps and also to get the oil from the reservoir back to the high pressure pump. For that, I will need a custom oil pan. I could buy this, but we're still trying to keep this under $1,500, so I will make it myself. A lot of times you will see these pans made from billet aluminum, but that's expensive. And like I said last time, 3-dimensional things are expensive, but 2-dimensional things are cheap. And 2-dimensional things can be assembled into 3-dimensional things. So I designed an oil pan that had multiple layers with spaced inlets and interior channels and outlets for scavenge pumps, and then I realized this is all kind of dumb. I can just have hoses on the bottom of the pan. If this was a new build, I'd be trying to get the pan as short as possible to get the engine as low as possible, but I already have engine mounts and I'm not going to move them to drop the engine another 20 millimeters, so I'll just use the space I have. This is it. One layer is a 1/4-inch spacer. The next layer is the main pan. It squishes up against the rubber seal for the high pressure inlet, so we can just plumb the inlet hose right from the reservoir to here. It also has 2 holes that go to the scavenge pump, one on either side of the engine. The next layer is another spacer, and then finally a cap to close it all off. I need this extra spacer to clear this tube that Honda put in the oil pan. This was all about $130 from Send Cut Send, so we're still below our target a little bit. I tapped the holes for some fittings so I could get some hoses connecting this all up. Look how close this is. I'm going to tell people I did that on purpose. Once I got the hose and the fittings to get the hoses attached, I realized that everything is mighty close together, like too close together. Like I might be able to have a 1-inch long hose here if I bend it tightly enough, and this one, I guess I could loop it around the back. Probably have to loop this one too. Then I'll have 2 looped hooks to catch road debris. What if I buy some fittings that are shorter? That doesn't work either. And this one is too short, but I bought a taller adapter. It's taller because it has a port here, but if I plug that port, I might be able to use one of these guys. You know what? Let's just try hard lines. There is a slight added cost of having to buy the hard lines and also the 37-degree flaring tool for the hard lines and also the bending tool so I can get that tight radius. But you gotta spend money to make money. With the hard line bent and flared, everything fits nicely. Barely, but also nicely. The main plate of aluminum here is a little heavy. I wanted to make sure I got good thread seal in the fittings, so I didn't want to go too thin, but most of this is just unnecessary weight. If only there was a way to make it lighter. Hey, wait a minute. Didn't I just buy a CNC machine? Oh, I did. We'll just pocket out some of this unneeded metal here, but instead of just machining it all out, we'll add an ISO grid. ISO grids are great for some engineering reason, but mostly because they look cool. You know what has lots of ISO grids? Space stuff. So I'll just design in a triangular grid pattern into this pan and people will look at it and go, wow, is that going to space? Except actual aerospace designers who will be angry that I didn't line up the bolt holes with any of the nodes, but I don't care what they think. What are they doing under my car anyway? So full disclosure, I didn't bother to look up any feed rates or spindle speed data before making this program. I just leaned on the knowledge I gained from CNC machining back in college. And let me tell you, I forgot how to CNC machine. But it did finish, and I did manage to reduce the weight of my oil pan by a few percent. And plus, look at it. Look at that professional looking dry sump system. I mean, don't look too closely because then you'll see all my tool chatter and crappy bends and so many imperfections. But from 3 feet away, that is a professional looking dry sump. And I spent a fraction of the price of an off-the-shelf system. Technically, it's a fraction. Oh, I forgot about the water pump. I had to buy an electric water pump because I removed the old one to put in these scavenging pumps, so there's that. Also, I haven't assembled a reservoir yet, nor have I designed it, nor have I bought all the fill caps and hoses and fittings and all the other assorted things for that. Also, the new coolant hoses, and I bought an actual oil pressure sensor, so we're a little bit over budget. Man, I always do this. Did you enjoy that video? I'm guessing you did because you're still here. If so, the algorithm must know. So hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't, send a link to your friends, your boss, your mom, tell her I said hi, and I'll see you next week.